That is that thinking about today, I was remembering last year's meeting and how much I enjoyed when Olympia played music for us, how much of a difference that makes cognitively. So, in following her wonderful example, I'm going to take 1.5 minutes of my own presentation just to play a little bit of music for us. And here we go. And hopefully this will sound okay to you. I hope you heard and enjoyed that. That's a piece called Lost Centuries by Rabi Abu Khalil. And I picked it before I looked at the name, and the name Lost Centuries is particularly meaningful, I think, in this case, because what I want to talk about is what motivated me to look into this digital approach to chemical humanities, and I will define chemical humanities and everything in a moment, is that there is as you see in my abstract, I mentioned there's a persistent sort of Orientalist attitude in the history of science in general toward non-Western contributions to science. Pretty much the cartoon version of it is that prior to, oh, I don't know, somewhere in the Middle Ages in nothing really like science was happening and so forth. And I know this has been contested a lot. And I know that those of us who've read the history know better than this. But if you look at any textbook in science, chemistry included, astronomy, all of them, they have very brief, maybe 10 pages if they're generous, of a history of their science. And that history, if it makes any reference to non-European findings or contributions, are tokenistic at best and always dismissive. And it's bizarre that it continues, but I think part of it has to do with the fact that so much of those contributions, so much of the text, the documentation from China, India, the Middle East is untranslated and unpublished. Mountains of it. Anyway, so that's what motivated me to go after this, to find a way to basically triage and sort out this vast body of work into piles before translating it, using machine learning to separate these out into piles which are strictly operational, sort of what would look to us like chemistry, versus those which are spiritual. That's been the issue for some time in the discussion about alchemical texts. Are these just confused meanderings of minds that are have religious and spiritual preoccupations and also have some interest in matter and creating substances? You know, again, that's the cartoon version. And a lot of work has been done in the last 20 years to raise alchemy to a state. This is the work of Newman and Principi, which I'll show you in a moment, to basically push back the history of chemistry further back into what used to be just alchemy. And they've done this, and so many scholars have gone along with this already. Ambix, the Journal for Chemistry's History, has indeed taken up that cause, but it's still very much a European alchemy that we're talking about, and not so much else. Although that is changing slowly. Okay, so there it is. But let's start up. Chemical humanities, digital humanities. What are these things? Humanities used to be a math and science free zone, a refuge for people who, but that's all over now. It's all over, and so this is going to be a steep climb, but always a fruitful one, I believe. So, in my own words, and I'm putting this very simply, these are things that chemistry can tell us about the history of human affairs. We can learn a lot about economic exchanges, political persuasions, changes in politics, health, art, religion, even philosophy, by tracking the use of various substances across the globe and across time. And conversely, history can tell us a lot about chemistry by looking at exactly those other non-scientific contexts to see how shifting of metaphor, shifting of interest in various substances and compounds, the very idea or what language is used to talk about substance compound mixture, purity, which is the big deal, right? Value, what's valuable, what is worth having, worth doing. Goodness, truth, beauty, reality, of course. Why beauty? Well, a lot of alchemy, if you may or may not know, really the most ancient stuff, has to do with things like personal hygiene, hair color, nail polish, things like that. Still chemistry. Okay, so here are some more specific examples that you can look at from a perspective of chemical humanities. After those atmospheric tests, there was a lot of fallout. But then it turns out that tracing the radioactive tracers, you could treat the radioactive material as tracers and really make the most accurate and precise mapping of ocean currents that we'd ever had, which we did not have before that. And so there's a lot mixed up in that usage of radioactivity there. As you probably again know, the ocean currents are huge in determining climate change and being able to track and monitor that. Similarly, chemistry has, if you just follow, just to know why isotopes are important, would give you a huge leg up on figuring out how people and substances move from place to place across the planet. That's a nice throwaway, but I have a backstory on that I'll tell you later if you're interested. Okay, so essentially anybody who does anything forensic is going to depend on chemistry at whatever stage in history that they've done so. A quick bit of epistemology. I think I've already played this out yesterday and a little bit more today, but here's a little something from Ian Hacking, the old Stanford School of Philosophy of Science. If you can spray it, you can say it. You can specifically say it's real. And I love that, but then he comes back immediately and says, look, remember that science is in fact self-vindicating, and you can design your experiments to vindicate you very much like really anything else that you can do with language. And the evolution of experimentation, of instrumentation, which we'll hear about with Chamizo soon, really does in fact continue that effort of self-vindication. So we have to be very clear. When we move on to our ontological hankerings, we have to be explicitly grounded in some level of epistemological clarity before we turn the lights out and start spraying and measuring and interpreting. I think you know what I mean. Okay, so I wrote my abstract, and I was happy to win a semester of sabbatical leave because of my actual proposal is not very much longer than the abstract you see in the book. I wrote that before I knew these two articles existed. These things came out in March. I was thrilled to see these. The work that's being done by Megan Pjorko and Sarah Lang and their colleagues is nothing short of amazing. And so what I'm going to do here is share with you some quotations from Pjorko's this is a special edition of Ambix, by the way. The entire thing is on alchemical practice and chemical humanities. And so I've just picked these two. When I found Sarah Lang's thing, it just blew me away because she's already done the work and has answered many questions about how am I going to start to do this thing that I've never done before. So basically, I have a concept that I need a lot of help to carry out. So I'll be looking forward to any comments you have as well. I won't go into the technicalities of the machine learning process, maybe in discussion. This is something, again, to repeat, I have not done this thing. I've proposed it. The proposal's been accepted and funded in some tiny seed grant affair, but there's much more to learn about if you're interested in this topic from reading Sarah's wonderful article. Okay, oops, here we go. There. So, when I read Pierco's article, I was stunned because after justifying all these different kinds of applications, things like I said, but in much more eloquent language, she and her co-authors end the article by saying, we must be like alchemists. And by that she meant that, they did whatever they could, catch as catch can. They worked in courts. They worked on the street. They had the highest esteem and the lowest esteem. They really covered it all. They used every kind of language. Basically, she's saying we should be interdisciplinary on steroids. And in the course of doing that, she does something that is close to my heart. I've written an article on chemical metaphor, but I held back because being an academic, it's kind of slow. But they've sped up the whole process, and they're explicitly saying, let's harness our alchemical and chemical metaphors, and this is the best way to approach chemical humanities. I was thrilled to see this, so I thought, all right, let's check it. Let's see how they do this. Here's another little bit here. It's a hybrid, bricolage, etc. I'm just going to jump right to here. This more recent discussion of science and empire. There's a couple of books out on this now and lots of articles tie together the political ambitions of colonial states and how science both aided that and benefited from it. And what we get here is a little bit of neutralizing, both from Raj and from Winterbottom. The language turns out to be something like, it would be valuable to speak of knowledge as cross-cultural collaboration via circulations and encounters between diverse communities and knowledge traditions around the world. Of course, what we're missing here is the genocide and all the other inhumanity, but we get some nice abstractions that fit well in an academic journal. Wonderful. All right. I'm not quite ready to go that neutral yet, but I'm sure I will get there. So let's see. Here are some of those vocabulary moments that Pierco mentioned. I've got to speed up because I've got two more things to do. So she picks some some terms. I've never seen most of these here. Ablution, I've seen, of course, coadunation, dealbation, ebullition, and fulminate, etc., to describe various knowledge processes. I think that's fun to suggest, and I think they're dead serious about using that. In any case, that's it for her article. I recommend reading it. It's a wonderful and very nicely written piece. But I want to jump over to Sarah Lang's work, which is much more directly here. This idea of a knowledge system that incorporates everything that you would need to interpret a single line of an alchemical text into one, I guess what he called it was a knowledge system, essentially, that's well, I'll leave it at that. This is the work of Foucault. But Newman and Principi should be familiar to you all. Here's the work that they've done some 20 years ago. They reshaped the idea of the historiography of alchemy and invented the term chemistry to take account of that. And Newman began by taking this thing, dechnomen, which basically means cover names. This is like a code, coding out and then decoding back into chemical terms what looks like just spiritual religious texts. And so this somewhat famous article here, I will address if I have time later, on the one hand establishes that you can actually cook up a dechnomen or find one if it still exists, but you can actually derive one. And then on the basis of that, having decoded the text into the language of substance and operation, actually perform those experiments. And perhaps you've seen William Newman do this on PBS and so forth, playing out some of those experiments, alchemical experiments that Isaac Newton did. Brilliant. And so what Sarah Lang is saying is that's great, but we can do that without going through the trouble of taking 20 years to figure out the decoding process and then trying to do it physically to show that it worked. We can do this with machine learning algorithms. So very much to my heart, I agree completely. This is a big time saver. We can achieve similar ends. That's great. And so comes my proposal here. All right, so I mentioned this already. A large problem. Orientalism has a lot of roots, but this this is an academic's way of thinking about it. And post-Trump era, evidentiary doesn't have the value it used to. But for us, at least, having some evidence to say, look, this is going to change the way we think is important. So my proposal is to, without translating any of these texts, find a way, and the way is Ekaterina Shutova has a way of doing this, unsupervised machine learning algorithms, basically crunching their way through and looking for certain patterns of text, of language, that would then indicate what kind of text this is. And this would basically enable the strategic thinking required to decide, where am I going to spend my time? What is worth the incredible labor-intensive activity of translation and then interpretation? So that's the deal. There are such things as language-agnostic natural language processing programs. This is kind of different from what Sarah Lang has done, but it would build on the things that she has found successful. She applied her algorithms to the Neo-Latin text of Michael Meyer, the very famous German alchemist. So let me give you a little bit more about how I would do this and what I'm after.
You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, I may be able to do it. First of all, what Newman and others before him have said is that there's really 2 kinds of alchemical texts. Some are actually going to lead to chemistry, and some are going to lead to nowhere. And in fact, Umberto Eco says they're just obfuscating on purpose. They're just complete waste of language and text. So to separate those 2 would be a service. That's great. I'm not sure if they're right about this, but that doesn't matter. I don't have a horse in that race as to which one of these is going to be the majority of the texts that we find. So these are the 3 piles that I would ask the algorithm to sort. How to do this? As you might imagine, this is a monstrous activity. This is going to take way past my lifetime to achieve, because in order to do any of this, you have to take these old dusty texts, render them machine readable, which is a huge amount of work by itself, in order to even prove the concept that it can be done in your language pre-translation effort. So what this requires is a leveraging of national pride in the idea of being the first to have discovered such and such chemical process. And priority disputes, as Eric has talked about a lot in the past, are some of the meat and potatoes of the history of chemistry. So that might be a way to do things. Once we get some evidentiary basis, that may begin to counteract habitual Orientalism and history of science in general. And indeed, with the interests in ethnobotany and herbalism that's kind of continuing to grow, the interest in fungi, the interest in plant materials, plant medicines is only increasing. There's something in England called hedge medicine, which is as old as the hedges in the West Country. These things are of great general public interest. So diving in there and finding anything about that, I think it's a virtual certainty that novel substances and operations, syntheses will be found. That's my faith. All right, so fine. What are the what am I going to get out of this besides serving the history of science community, a community that I've never been in, but I appreciate their work. I think there's some philosophical questions here as well, and these are interesting to me. We would be able to answer questions, again, before even translating. What's the overall proportion between exoteric and spiritual texts? And does the overall proportion of exoteric and esoteric alchemical texts vary from culture to culture, from one historical period to another in the same culture? Is there any correlation between the proliferation of exoteric or esoteric and any of the other significant social activities that are happening? I don't know. These are good questions that we may be able to answer. Finally, I have a couple of little bits of beef to put out there to smoke. And one of them is this. So Newman and Principi, they are the superstars of history of alchemy. And so they've laid down things, and these young scholars, Lang and Piorco and others, have built on this. This is one thing that stood out for me. This is Lang saying that these folks have made convincing case against strictly spiritual interpretations, right, of alchemy, ultimately creating a means for an unbiased, thorough analysis of alchemical language which insists on descriptive precision. And this just blows my mind because this idea of chasing the spooks away is as old as the Enlightenment. It doesn't work. And really, that whole idea of bringing the spooks back in the form of understanding the context within which these books were written to understand what they might mean, they don't go away. It's as though these people have not heard of Quine. It's as though they don't know that 20th century positivism, this neutral descriptive precision stuff, it doesn't work. We need something more cognizant. It's okay, these folks are young. Maybe they'll do some, and they're historians of science, not philosophers of science. And this is just a small thing. It may be a simple slip, and I'm not really going to worry about it too much. But my bigger beef is with Newman's article, the famous article where he says, there's a decunomen here. And if we find the decunomen, we can decode any alchemical text. And Sarah Lang has indeed done this with some books of John Dee and John Dee's father. So this is something that does work. It's beautiful. But the thing is that it does not require the refutation of Jungian or any other brand of spiritual or symbolic interpretation of alchemical text. So the fact that Newman makes such a big deal about this in his article and goes on a dragon slaying hunt, to me sounds like an overcompensation. It makes me suspicious as to what's going on and why do we need to do this, especially since chemical humanities is about bringing these things together, not about separating and throwing out the trash. So I just dropped that off at the end here. This old disjunction, we can let go of that at some point, I hope, even within academia, even though we are also very much intellectual and spiritual in our pursuits. We do have to deal, as chemistry reminds us, with stuff. That's it. I will stop at this point. Happy to take your questions and your suggestions, and look forward to anything in later discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michelle has a question, and then Klaus, but first Michelle.
Yes, thank you for the talk. That was very interesting. I have just one very brief comment and then a sort of question. So the brief comment is, when you're talking about a language agnostic way of going through these texts, I suspect what they mean is logic. And there's a very interesting article. I'll have to look up the reference. I don't have the book with me, but there's an interesting article about whether the language of the logic is, say, a Polish notation versus what it is that we look at now. You end up having you carve up language in a very different way. So I'm not sure that you can get several language neutral methods, but they're all going to come up with different results is the point. So be careful about that, because it's not an innocent step.
Absolutely. Thank you.
But also, and this idea of chasing the spooks, I mean, you put it very nicely. There's also a movement in philosophy of science to acknowledge the fact that we are scientists and that we're implicated in our observations. And the alchemical notions of the scientist having certain virtues has not gone away from science. It's still present in science. And we shouldn't brush that aside in the hope of objectivity. I think it's a misconception of what objectivity means, that we have to be removed from the observations and we do it cleanly with a machine, and we're not even there. We are there, and we shouldn't forget that. So just to add some grist to your mill, as it were. That's all.
Thank you, Michelle. Those are excellent comments, and it highlights the fact that much more for me now that the digital humanities approach that Sarah Lang is promoting in the language, I don't know if she's conscious of it, kind of goes against what Megan Piorko did in her article, where she's bringing this stuff in. So there's an interesting conflict there that needs to be made conscious. Thanks for making that more explicit for me.
Klaus, please.
Yes, thank you, Farzad. Very well done. I'm very happy that you are taking up that idea, because I'm pretty sure that we will learn that chemistry is more than mathematical calculations, because it is about substances.
Indeed, thank you. You remind me now, it's great to see you again, that a lot of this work is inspired, I forgot to mention, by Guillermo Restrepo. Since our meeting in 2011 in Colombia with his mathematical chemistry approach, he's been applying that more recently to the history of chemistry and the social history in general. So he's been doing the whole chemical humanities thing. And it's really, he's inspired me, his work and reading his work has inspired me to do this. And I plan to be in Germany to work with him at Max Planck sometime next year, I hope, and see my other colleagues. And by that time, I hope to have gotten at least a toy algorithm together to bring around and try out on those big data sets that he works with there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question by Jerry, please.
Thank you. Very, very nice presentation, Farzad. I have long been interested in the history of chemistry, and I have struggled for so many times trying to interpret early medieval and later alchemical directed papers and what they could possibly mean in terms of the modern chemical terminology. And so I really look forward to how this project progresses, and particularly how it will build on William Newman's work on reproducibility of alchemical experiments. This certainly is the key issue involved here. Now, I think with that being said, and I would say, number one, I'd be happy to work with you if I can be of any use to you. Absolutely. In your explorations of how the algorithms might develop. And then I would also say that I really second Michelle's notions. She's right on target when it comes to the different notations for logic. These different logical notations are very, very misleading. And they certainly greatly confuse communication within the philosophy of the sciences as a group of activities. And within that context, the development which I would see coming out of your work, or which you would contribute to it, would be a clarification of the role of discrete mathematics versus continuous mathematics. This is a very crucial mathematical issue in the interpretation of the meaning of the sciences. And particularly to this end, I would see that the um, explanations used in the science of chemistry are always within the terms of discrete numbers, discrete structures, discrete experiments, and these explanations are semantically and semiotically limited to particular situations.
Yes.
So there's this local logic that is essential to description of chemical experiments that is, well, it's essential, period.
That's huge.
But the last statement would be then that within this context, you cite Quine. And here I think you have to be very, very cautious because he defines, well, his statement is very clear. To be is to be a variable. And that sort of contradicts the notion of chemical substance.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Before you reply to that, Jose has a question, and we are already on the time of the next talk. So I will ask Jose Antonio to ask it quickly, and then to reply quickly, and then we move on. Thank you very much.
It's just a comment. Congratulations, Farzad, for to start such huge project about the memory of other people in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimmy. I really appreciate that. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. I look forward to any suggestions you have. This is not my field. I'm learning along with everybody. So every individual concern you have is of great value to me. I look forward to talking with you all more later. Thank you.
Yes.